welcome back to another episode of A Guide to B2B Podcasting. Today we're going to go through a handful of different tactics on how to promote your podcast. And the first thing I'm going to say is there is no magic sauce that is going to magically get you thousands of downloads and subscribers overnight. It really comes down to a lot of tactics that aren't really rocket science, but there's a few I think in here that a lot of people don't think of when they get to podcasting. So excited, and let's dive in. I'm going to start off with what I think is one of the most advanced, underutilized, and really most powerful promotion techniques for podcasting. And this is to basically get your podcast syndicated via trade publications or other industry publications. So when I say syndicated, what that means is basically you're giving your content to a magazine and having them republish that podcast on their website as content. This isn't always easy to do. It's not possible in every single industry. But if you can pull this off, this is probably one of the best exposure approaches you're going to have. I'll give you an example. We have a client who has a podcast in a rather industrial niche. What we did is one of our first really 5 to 10 interviews, we reached out and we interviewed the founder of one of the leading trade publications within their industry. Had a great conversation, and what they ended up doing was they put a sponsorship for the trade publication at the front of the podcast, and in exchange, the trade publication basically is going to post every single podcast that this company does through their website because it's great new free content for them to share with their audience. And so that is an amazing win. It's a really big win to get something like that in place where suddenly now they're creating this content and this trade magazine is going to be publishing this out to thousands of their ideal customers on a regular basis. And so these things, there's no clockwork way to do this. It's custom. It's finding the right people. It's building the relationship. Not everyone will be open to it, but it's if you can pull this off, it is what I think is one of your biggest opportunities to promote your podcast. So that is kind of the grand scheme, big one there. And again, a few more tactics. Again, what we did to pull this off and what I have done to try to pull this off with others is to start off interviewing people. And if you want to see if someone will syndicate your stuff, interview them first. And try to bring them onto your show and use that as a starting point of a relationship and see where it goes from there. Make the ask, and you'll be surprised. Most of these publications, they're starving. They're looking for more content. And so if you're going to give them free content, that's a big win for them. So we hit the big one. Now let's scale back to the basics here. That's the grand finale of podcast promotion in a lot of ways, but let's dive into some of the other kind of more basic tactics. The first one is simply, it's also, I guess, syndication, but I would call this directory and platform syndication. And so this is table stakes for podcast promotion. And this is basically meaning that you need to make sure that your podcast is out there in Apple, it's in Google, it's in Spotify, it's everything like that. You're also ideally sharing that on YouTube as well in a video format. And then you're really getting that out there also to all these small up-and-coming podcast platforms as well. Again, this isn't hard to do. There's a lot of platforms out there that do this automatically, make this really easy for you, or you just have to one time go through and submit all your podcasts to these various directories. Again, if you hire a podcast agency like Content Allies, you don't have to worry about that. We do it all for you. But that is a one-time thing you do need to do is make sure you get your podcast out there into all the directories so that it's discoverable and people can find it. The next piece that kind of goes right on the back end, that is what I call podcast SEO. And this is really about brainstorming and including keywords into each episode and into your podcast description and title to try to make sure that you're getting as much organic discoverability as possible. So it is common, that you'll try to do a podcast and there's some name, you don't want to go too boring with the name where it's, I guess sometimes I'm for it. I went for a guide to B2B podcasting because it's just very straightforward and to the point. But we've got another client. I'll give you an example. Their podcast is called Deconstructed, and it's about really the commercial real estate industry. And so they want to kind of get creative with the name. So what we did is we called it Deconstructed, the Future of CRE. And then in the podcast description, even in parentheses, we put commercial real estate. And we do all of that because we want to make sure that we're capitalizing on that CRE and commercial real estate keywords. So we're putting that in the title, even if it's not really in the artwork of the show. So making sure to get your SEO optimized on your titles, your podcast description as well. One of the things I almost always do in the podcast description, not for individual episodes, but for each show, is I will basically, we'll do our summary. This is what the show, this is what it's about. And then we'll say topics that we will cover in the show include, and then you basically list out a ton of the keywords you want your podcast to rank for. And those are, ideally will be relevant topics as well. But you think, what are things that people might search for? What are some of the keywords we want to rank for, topics, things like that. And by doing that, again, you're going to get your show organically discovered more often. You can do a similar thing on a per episode basis, making sure that you've got good show notes that are really capturing and covering a lot of the keywords and things that are relevant and that people may search for. Just making sure that you're doing that and you're not just, writing a 3-word, show notes or something. Because, if you do that, you're really missing out on a chance for organic discoverability as well. So podcast SEO, just another piece there of just kind of doing the best you can to optimize that as well. All right, the next promotion tactic is really repurposing content into social media posts. So this is just huge. You've got so much that you can take a single podcast and you could make 10, 20, 30 social media posts out of that if you wanted to. Sometimes that's a little bit too much. I don't want to go overkill here, but at least getting 3 to 5 social media posts out of every podcast you do is definitely worthwhile. Some of the formats we like to do in this is social videos where you take a kind of short snippet from the guest and turn that into a video that features them talking. You can also do audiograms if you don't have great video. There's a ton of great tools out there that do these audiograms where it's kind of showing the words on screen with a nice little animation. Really easy to put those together these days. Then you can also do quote blocks where you kind of design this nice little graphic where it's this quote aha moment from the guest. So just making sure to use all of those are really good, powerful kind of pieces there. So just repurposing those, putting those out there, that's going to help promote and get your podcast out there on social, especially if you've got any level of decent social following, putting that on your personal LinkedIn, your company LinkedIn. If your audience is on Facebook or Twitter or anything there, you can utilize those channels also. The other really cool thing is that whenever you create all this social content, you can give this to your guests to share. And so what's really cool is if you send your guests a link and say, hey, here's this post, we just announced it, can you share this out? Really easy for them to go share that out. Or you give them the videos and the quote blocks and their marketing team starts scheduling and posting this out. Some of the most popular episodes that we have had on our shows are whenever a guest really takes that and runs with it and takes those social assets and promotes it and puts it out there. That leads to a ton of traction, especially if you've got a big name guest on the show. So that social content, really, really valuable to kind of go ahead and put that out there. Another tactic is to use content promotion tools. One of the favorite ones we use is the tool called QPromote. So here's how QPromote works. They have a partnership with Buffer. And Buffer is similar to Hootsuite. It's one of these social media scheduling tools where you go and you try to populate content for your personal social media. And so what's really cool about Buffer is they'll have this thing on the side where it says recommended content to share. The Buffer users don't know, they're just getting things that the algorithm is showing that is similar to things that they're sharing. And basically what QPromote is you're paying to become that recommended content to share. So you load this into QPromote. QPromote makes some really cool little social posts and things like that people can just click, boom, add that to my social feed. And it's crazy when you do this. I mean, we'll have shows that get 3,000, 4,000, views or shares or stuff like that or clicks just all from QPromote on that. So really cool tool. Love this tool. It's amazing. Again, not all content pieces do as well, but sometimes you get some that really just resonate with people and go a long way. There's other content promotion tools out there. I think Outbrain is another one that I have not personally used, but I've heard a lot of good things about. And so that's another way to look at it. Another tactic you can look at is just, paid boosting and promotion behind those social posts. So if you're doing these videos, these quote blocks, these episode announcements, just putting some paid budget to boost those on social media can go a long way to help promote and get the word out about the podcast as well. Next, I'll share another, more advanced tactic, but one that I think is brilliant. And I have to do a big shout out to Peter Murphy Lewis, one of our clients over at Experience.care, who brought this brilliant strategy to my mind. But what we'll do is basically whenever we interview someone for a podcast, we'll say, hey, if we wrote up an article for your site, would you publish this podcast on your site as well? And a lot of people are like, yeah, you're going to give me free content for my website? That's great. And what's really cool is now you're basically posting this podcast interview with this guest, and you're getting this on their website. And that's great for just exposure and reach of your podcast, but also really phenomenal for backlink SEO. Again, that's a really powerful one there to just do, basically offer to post this podcast on your client's site and give them an article to post this on their site. So again, a really powerful approach there that I'm really big fan of. Big shout out to Peter for bringing that brilliant strategy to my mind. So next we'll go into another strategy, which is really doing a podcast tour. This time I'll shout out to speakonpodcast.com, one of our partners in this space. Big fan of these guys, where basically they will get you booked and scheduled to go speak on a ton of podcasts. And this is one of the best podcast promotion tactics you can use. It's also great to just promote your business in general, because if you think about it, someone's listening to a podcast and they listen to you and you're an interesting guest on some show that they subscribe to, and you're able to say, oh yeah, I've got my own podcast where we talk about this. That person is on the podcast app. They are using the app right there, and it's really easy for them to just open up, boom, oh cool, there's a show, subscribe. And it's really, I would say it's one of the highest converting podcast promotion strategies you can use. Obviously, it takes time from you, but again, there's also all the secondary benefits, the PR, the brand awareness, the inbound lead generation it can drive whenever you go speak and appear on other people's podcasts. So there's also SEO backlinks, so many great things that come from speaking on podcasts. So big fan of that approach as well. And the last one, again, if you want the benefits of the podcast tour in terms of growing your podcast, but and you have budget, but you don't have time, then another thing you can look at is podcast ads. So it's crazy, but it's really not that expensive to sponsor a lot of podcasts. You'd be surprised. Most shows doing, I would say, between 1,000 and 5,000 downloads a month. You can sponsor them for, it depends really on the audience, but I would say between 500 to $2,000 a month for most shows that are, small range. And where you can basically put a sponsor plug on their show for your podcast. And so it's really interesting, but you'll hear podcasts that are actually sponsoring others as growth mechanisms for their podcast. So again, if you've got budget but not time or a professional that can do all these podcast tours, I think that's another really great way you can look at and aiming to try to get exposure on other podcasts as well. So that is a lot of the primary channels, things that I'm looking at. Again, you can also do PR pushes around this. You can leverage your existing audience and newsletter. And so a lot of this, it comes down to, do you have existing channels that you can push this out through as well? That's always your short-term quick wins for companies. But again, you can also, and I guess I would say, if you're trying to just do PR just to announce a podcast, it's going to be hard. But again, if you've got PR relationships, that's almost kind of like syndicating via trade publications. If you can get that kind of announced or leverage those as well. So a lot of tactics there, but again, I would look at how can you first promote this to everybody in your existing sphere, and then everything I talked about today, hopefully those are some great tactics to help take this a level further. Thanks for listening, and hope, again, you found the episode valuable. Feel free to reach out to me at jake@contentallies.com if you have any questions, or head over to contentallies.com, say hello. We look forward to hearing from you, and we'll see you on the next episode of A Guide to B2B Podcasting.